of The Exchange, I speak to bloggers Jasmeen and Kiran about the importance of having open conversations, and Nathaniel Cole discusses the language and the law around consent. Hi Nathaniel.
Hello.
It's so great to have you on The Exchange today to talk about consent. First question to you really is, what do we mean when we talk about consent?
Consent in the law means when someone has capacity and freedom to make a choice. So we break that down into two parts. Capacity means if someone understands what saying yes or no means in that moment. That can be affected by things like mental health issues, being under the influence of alcohol, severe tiredness, lots of things can affect someone understanding what yes or no means. And then the freedom part of it means it's free from pressure, so they're free to make that choice for themselves based off what they want. But it's not something that just, it happens once and then that's it, checked out for the rest of the relationship. I look at relationships as like an ongoing equal exchanges, and consent is a core part of that.
And why do you think consent is so often misunderstood?
It's always shaped as a conversation about yes, or yes or no, and that's a really good gateway into understanding it. But I think it goes a lot more deeper than that, because when we look at that law definition of consent about the capacity and freedom to make choices, someone can say yes if they've been manipulated into that. Someone can say yes even if they don't have the capacity to understand what saying yes means in that situation. It's misunderstood as consent means yes, but actually it's consent, someone understanding what saying yes means.
Hi Jasmeen and Kiran, how are you guys?
I'm really good.
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Good start to the day so far.
So much of what you guys have to say in your blogs is focused around breaking down stigma when it comes to sex and relationships. Where do you think that this stigma comes from?
I think that because the South Asian community is traditionally it's quite close-knit, so there's a lot of stigma in terms of, oh, what will they think, or what will she think, what will the family think, what would our friends think. So I think there's a lot of kind of a shame and reputation that always comes into play when it's involving decisions of your life.
I don't think my parents ever spoke to me about consent. They still haven't. I think again, back to the sort of shying away from those sort of subjects, because it's kind of frowned upon, I guess, to be young and not in a relationship and be sexually active. So I think maybe parents, communities think talking about consent is sort of encouraging people to go and be sexually active, which is not the case. I think as friends we speak about it, probably more so now. But yeah, it's important conversation to be had. But like I said, growing up for myself, and I think for many other South Asian women, consent was never raised in the family household.
Is there anything that you wish that your parents or your families had told you when you were younger that I suppose would help you navigate these sort of tricky questions around sex and relationships?
I think what would have been useful looking back on growing up, what kind of good relationships look like and what bad relationships look like, in terms of what a toxic relationship looks like. And I think consent's a bigger thing now, but when we were growing up it wasn't. And then also warning signs, what you might need to look out for, what you deserve. I think people just don't tend to talk about that. I think you think that, when you're grown up, you look for those qualities and you'll learn them on the way. But when you're a teenager, people don't want you to rush into like a full-blown relationship. They want you to focus on your studies, your career. So no one talks about it, but you could then easily fall into a relationship where there are warning signs, there's bad signs, but you don't know any better.
I think that's so important. I think when we're talking about relationships, when it comes to education, if we don't educate children about what good relationships look like, how are they going to know?
I guess the silence and sort of not having that conversation brought up to you when you're younger within a family environment or within your friends, it can be really misleading. You can make bad decisions from it, things that you regret, and things like this can stick with you as you're growing up and can probably really affect your mental health, and probably make you feel a bit embarrassed talking about it, because it's not spoken about within your community or within your friend circle, or, as I said before, family. So it can be quite damaging, I think.
Yeah, I think if we don't talk about consent, it's very easy to end up in a place through no fault of your own where you're vulnerable to dangers, where people can take advantage of you. Obviously, being a victim of sexual harassment can leave you feeling really confused and ashamed. How can we empower people to speak up when their consent has been violated?
I guess it's a complex issue in terms of making those safe spaces. It can be really hard, and not everyone, everyone's on their own journey. I can't even imagine like sharing your own story, how hard it is. I think creating safe spaces, talk about your stories, where, whether it's women or different people want to come together and share their stories, using platforms on social media to kind of almost normalize the conversations around consent. And again, there's people finding themselves in situations that they look back on now and think that wasn't okay. Getting more normal to share those stories and talking about it. We've still got a long way to go, but it's kind of the same in this situation.
I think there's still a long way to go. I still think there's that in the back of people's minds, sort of that if I speak about it, will people judge me? And I think maybe that's why we've been shy away from talking about such important things and things that have happened to them. But the more you share your experiences, the more you'll find that people can relate to you and people experience the same things.
What are the ways that people communicate that they are giving consent or withholding consent?
So we always break this down into non-verbal communication and verbal communication. So when we're looking at verbal communication and things other than yes, it's saying things like, oh, I like you, what can we do together? I feel like, doing this, how do you feel about that? How can we both enjoy something? I think it's really important that we make feelings known. So rather than just talk about the actions as well, it's like, I feel happy when we kiss or hug or do other stuff. And we look at things to say no, other than obviously no. So you can say things like, oh, I don't really feel comfortable right now. I don't think we should do this. I wouldn't want to do that. I know we talked about doing something, but actually I don't feel like it anymore. Can we do something else instead? So those are some verbal examples. And with non-verbal, you've got things like being happy, like showing happiness. And how do we show happiness? Show that by smiling, by laughing. You've got things like kissing, like active touching, hugging. And then with the no's, it's like looking away. It's, expressing sadness, crying, pushing people away, getting up, not reciprocating any kind of advancement. So if someone's taking off their clothes, it's not you taking off yours as well. There's many ways, and it's important for us to know that what to do when we see someone showing that they're interested or showing that they're not interested.
And ideally, I suppose, we want to give as much communication to the other person as possible, to give them as many clues as to whether we are giving our consent in those situations. Obviously, sometimes it's really emotionally challenging when someone doesn't want to do what you want to do. How should people deal with that respectfully?
It's really it comes down to respecting boundaries. And I think the clue is kind of in the question about how do we do it respectfully. It's like, treat people how we want to be treated. I wouldn't want to be forced to do something just to make them happy. I'd want my boundaries to be respected. And also another really good way is just trying to change the scenery of where you are. So if lights are off, it's turning lights on. If you can, just like quickly go to the bathroom to kind of collect yourself, wash your face, that sort of thing. Something to take your mind and body kind of out of where you're at in that moment.
So consent is obviously applicable in a lot of different circumstances. When it goes very wrong, it can obviously lead to sexual harassment, assault, or even rape. What should somebody do if their consent has been violated in this way?
So when that happens, it's important that people get somewhere that feels safe for them. Try and speak to someone that you trust, and that might not necessarily be a family member, and that's okay. and also that might not be a friend, and that's okay as well. But it's really important to know that when, you know, rape, sexual assault and harassment happens, like no one's alone in this. It's about not shifting blame onto yourself or anything like that. It's just about ideally being able to get the help that you need.
Why is consent the foundation of any good relationship? And what would you say to people who are watching this, who are perhaps finding asking for consent slightly embarrassing?
I think consent is a good foundation for a relationship because it helps build trust, and it ensures that you're communicating properly. You're completely opened up to that person. Talking about consent, it shouldn't be an embarrassing issue. If you've had the conversation about consent, you sort of know where you both are, you feel comfortable with that person. So yeah, I think if anyone is struggling, it's just a conversation that you need to have. And I'm sure like 90% of those conversations are going to go well. You just need to bite the bullet and just do it. And I'm sure everything will be fine.
Consent is like building a strong foundation of respect at the start of the relationship, and it's really key to get that respect and, you know, that understanding at the start. So I think it's always key to start the road well in a relationship.
I love how you say that, Jasmeen, just bite the bullet and have the conversation, because I think that's so important. So thank you so much, and good luck to British Bindi.
Thank you for having us.